Hello, welcome to Tyler's Tributes, the show where we analyze the classics and not so classic films of the past and never of the present. Now, my name is Tyler. I am a lifelong cinephile and I just love films. Now, I'm in no ways an expert on films. I do have a degree in film studies, but I'm no way an expert. I do not do this professionally. These are all my personal opinions, my personal analytical tidbits of different of the films that you will see being reviewed on this particular show. Now, I'm going to break down my reviews in basically two ways, similar to the way that Rotten Tomatoes does. There's going to be a critical way, and then there's going to be kind of an audience way. Now, the way I break that down personally is that it'll be analyzed critically, and then the audience way of analyzing it is whether I enjoy it or not, or what I find enjoyable about it. So when I analyze a film critically, that includes the technical aspects of the film, and when I analyze my enjoyment factor, I'll analyze the things I like about it, like the story, characters, set pieces, so on and so forth. Now, the very first film I'm going to review for you today is one of my personal favorites. It's actually the film that got me started in the world of being a cinephile and loving films, and that would be Sam Peckinpah's 1969 immortal Western classic, The Wild Bunch. Now, this is easily my favorite Western. Close runner-ups in the Western department for me include Tombstone, The Searchers, and other very classic Westerns. But this one has got to be my absolute favorite, just because it offers so much in terms of what a Western is, what a Western could be, and what it really represents. Now, when Sam Peckinpah released this film in 1969, it stirred up an enormous controversy through its depiction of violence, its treatment of women, its use of children in the film. It was just, no one had ever seen quite anything like it, especially in a Western, which up until that point had usually been kind of, I'm not going to say family friendly, but it was usually a very straightforward way of making Westerns, whereas Sam Peckinpah kind of turned it on its head. Now, the beauty of this film is what it represents to the Western genre overall. Now, by the late 1960s, the Western had effectively died off. And given what this film is about a dying band of outlaws who are being slowly crushed by an ever-encroaching sense of civilization and society into their dying Western outlaw American West world, it's very cool because it holds very much a real life parallel to the fact that at this time when the film came out, the Western was dying off in a way. So I would like to think that this film kind of represents the death of the classic Westerns of like the 50s and the early 60s, and kind of the revisionist Westerns that would soon follow The Wild Bunch. Of the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s. Now, a little bit of backstory about the film. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, of course. All the films that I review, I highly recommend that you watch. Anyway, so a little backstory. The Wild Bunch follows a group of aging and dying outlaws set in the year 1913, I believe. Now, 1913, historically, around that time was essentially was the last years, really, of the classic American outlaw. Civilization, the Industrial Revolution had taken place, World War I was raging, and basically modern civilization was kind of taking over, and the wildness of the Wild West was slowly dying off. So this film kind of represents, a few parallels to the idea of the dying Western, both of the film Western and the actual Western time period in which the film is set. Anyway, so this group of outlaws, led by the incomparable William Holden, who plays the outlaw group leader Pike Bishop, is going after a series of robberies, basically to set them, that kind of one last score that'll set them up, so they can ride off into the proverbial sunset. But they find themselves being hounded by a lynch posse, or a posse that's set on them by the local railroad company, led by actually one of Pike Bishop's former outlaw comrades. The film is it's such a rich tapestry in terms of sound, color, scope, vision, character, narrative. It just has so much going for it. So we're going to kind of start off with my review of the critical aspects of it. Basically, the things that really stand out to me in terms of the technical aspects of the film. Now, first thing is going to be camera movements. This includes like close-ups, pans, tracks, zooming shots, anything that really adds to the film's overall scope and depth, but also because of what these particular shots represent. Now, the zooming close-ups are remarkable in this film because they follow each other one right after the other, and they zoom in, especially in the film's climax, which is without a doubt one of the greatest climaxes in film history, when Pike and three of his outlaw gang, basically there's only four of them left by the end of the film, basically take on, it's four of them against, I believe, 1,000 Mexican soldiers in an attempt to rescue a comrade who had been captured by the Mexican army. And, you know, they know that it's futile and fruitless, but you know what, they live by a code, and so they're going to essentially die by that code. But it's a really remarkable, just before the climax begins, there's a number of zooming close-ups to all the faces of each of the outlaw gang as they kind of reconcile their fate as to what's about to happen to them, because they know they're not walking out of there alive. But gosh darn it, they are going to take as many of their enemies as they can with them. Other remarkable camera movements in the film, or camera shots in the film, are a series of long takes. Now, a series of long takes or long shots that really, really give you the scope of this Western world that these outlaws live in. Now, there's one very, very cool sequence in the film where Pike is up on a ridge and he's basically scanning the horizon to make sure it's all clear, so they can transport an arms shipment that they're going to exchange for that last score. And it's really cool. It brings binoculars up to the camera, so the binoculars essentially become the camera. It zooms in on one of their compatriots, letting them know it's all clear. He's waving his arms like this, and then it pulls out, and then it's just this really amazing, you know, it's like it kind of combines like a pan, a track, a long shot, and a zoom in and a zoom out, and it's just it's amazing what Peckinpah was able to create as you literally. As the binoculars come up to the camera, you step into the shoes of Mr. Bishop, Pike Bishop, William Holden's character, as he surveys the scenery and the horizon to see to make sure the coast is clear. You literally step into his shoes. But yeah, so there's a number of amazing camera shots in the film. But in terms of the one technical aspect of this film that really makes it stand out is its use of editing. Now, it's really, really quite something because up until this film actually set the world record for most edits in a film. There are 3,643 edits or edited shots in this film. And nowhere near had any film up until that, or at least no Technicolor film up until that point, had even come close to that many edited shots in a single film. 3,643 edits. Nowadays, that's pretty that's actually low for most films because, I mean, let's face it, you know, modern filmmaking technology, modern filmmakers, they really like their edits. But it wasn't just the number of edits that director Peckinpah used, it was the way he did it. He has brilliant uses of intercutting, fragmented quick cuts. It's just remarkable. There's one really amazing sequence in the film. It's actually in the opening shootout of the film, where a man is shot and he falls. He's up on top of a roof and he falls over, and it quick cuts to another gang member running out of the bank, shooting their gun up at the roof where the other bounty hunters are, and then it immediately cuts to that same bounty hunter falling, only this time he's a little bit closer to the ground, and then it immediately quick cuts again, and then goes back to the man falling, and then quick cuts to another time, and then goes back to the man falling. So there's four different, what should have been one take of watching a guy fall, Peckinpah intercut four different quick cuts into that one fall. So it's very much, each of them was a gun of a man firing a gun. So, you know, it's almost like each of those shots is eclipsed by the sound of the gunshot, and it's almost like they're shooting the man as he's falling when they're not really shooting, but just the way that Peckinpah intercuts those fragmented quick cuts, it just gives you the impression that this man's just being shot constantly as he's falling when he's actually not. It's just this use of quick cuts, of fragmented quick cuts um, that are interplayed between the man falling and the outlaws escaping the payroll bank. Another amazing technical aspect of the film that really stands out is its use of sound. Now, the greatest sound that is used in the film is, of course, given its content, is the sound of a gunshot. And I mean that really just spells out the entire film for you right there. These men live and die by their guns. In fact, Pike at one point says in the film, we live or die by our guns, but we got to start thinking something beyond our guns because those days are closing fast, realizing that their outlaw ways are coming to an end with the ever encroaching idea of a civilized society settling the Old West. But yeah, it's just the gunshot, the sound of the gunshots used in the film are used so frequently, but they're used to such poignant effect. Again, it just creates almost like a ripple effect throughout the film, where you think you hear gunshots, but you're not really hearing gunshots. And the really interesting thing is that during the shootouts of the film, of which there are three primary shootouts in the film, no music is used during any of these shootouts. The sound of the gunshots, the guns themselves, they become the soundtrack during the shootouts. They become the music, or as I like to call it, almost like a bullet symphony. Where we have classic Springfield 1911 45 pistols have replaced violins, and shotguns have replaced clarinets, and Winchester rifles have replaced bass oboes. It's really quite something, where Peckinpah basically substitutes an orchestra for guns, and it's really quite something. Another really interesting and aspect of the film that really makes it stand out are its themes. Now, its themes are very varied, and some are themes that are common in a Western, some are not. Themes of the film include violence towards women, violence around children. The film had a very big anti-Vietnam message. Dying way of life was a very prominent theme of the film, and of course the theme of age, because all of these outlaws, they're not young. There's only one member of the Wild Bunch who is in fact what you would consider a young man. His name is Angel, played by Jamie Sanchez, who in the film was probably, I think he was meant to be probably in his late 20s or his early 30s. But at that time, that probably was considered old, given the life expectancy back then. But the rest of the gang are in most of them are in their late 40s or their early to mid 50s, or even in one case, one of them, Sykes, played by Edmund O'Brien, he's got to be in his early to mid 60s, and he's definitely the dinosaur of the Wild Bunch. But age is a very prominent theme. But jumping back to that first theme that I talked about, violence towards women, again, a very controversial theme. The film's treatment of women is not ideal. Women are the only women in the film are portrayed. The only female characters in the film really are portrayed as like weak, or in it for sex, or who are in fact prostitutes in the film, or they're called prostitutes, they're seen as prostitutes. There's no really empowered or nurturing women in these films. Women in the world of the Wild Bunch are seen as nothing more than disposable pleasures, or something to be mocked at or scorned, or something to be ridiculed, or something to be just cast aside, or in one case possessed, when Angel, played by Jamie Sanchez, who's the youngest member of the Wild Bunch, actually murders his former lover for leaving him and going to the film's antagonist, General Mapache. But rather than, understand that or try to win her back maybe in a way, he just literally, calls her a derogatory name and then just guns her down right there in front of everyone. And he's not... He's not even punished for that. So the film's treatment, violence towards women, again, a very, very controversial subject, but actually led to a lot of people um, believing that Sam Peckinpah himself was a misogynist. But I leave such decisions up to you after you watch the film. But Peckinpah believed that in order to really address a prevalent social issue, you needed to you couldn't hide it. You had to show it. And the treatment of women at this time, around the time the film was made, violence towards women, it's not like this was a new idea. No, this is something that had happened. So Peckinpah felt that in order to raise the issue, he had to show it. And unfortunately, he had to show it in all of its grim glory. Or not, sorry, not glory, but in all of its way, for lack of a better word. Another theme that I mentioned was violence around children. Not violence towards children, but violence around children. When the film opens, the Wild Bunch is literally riding into town where they come across a group of children who are watching a swarm of ants slowly devour two scorpions. Now, this scene is kind of a two-pronged theme or metaphor, really. They're watching this violence happen between these two animal species, but they're not shocked. They're actually like reveling it. They're smiling. They're having fun, and it's a game to them. And also the other prong of that two-pronged metaphor was the fact that the ants represent the ever-emerging civilized society, and the scorpions represent the Wild Bunch because they are literally being consumed. They're dying. Their kind is dying out, and they're literally being consumed and absorbed into the civilized society. But the scorpions continue to fight back because they live one way, just like the outlaws do, and they refuse to bend to society's wishes. But yeah, so that violence around children is a very, very prominent theme in the film, and it's really quite something. At one point after the film's opening shootout, we see a group of kids who are reenacting the shootout, but not with guns. Their fingers are the guns, and they're like shooting at each other, going bang, 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 and they're having fun, and violence has become a game to them because they're just surrounded by it. And again, kind of brings up the idea of its anti-Vietnam War message. The constant violence that we're being exposed to, or that they were being exposed to because of the images that kids were seeing of Vietnam, and the war images and the fighting, and how kids were essentially becoming desensitized to the nature of very, very real-world violence, and yet the kids in the film who had witnessed a very similar type of violence, they make a game out of it because it's just a way of life to them, and it's become a game. They make a game out of it. So, again, dying way of life, very prominent theme. Like the theme that really runs through the very heart of the film, along with the theme of age. Just coming to an end, but a dying way of life that these outlaws are sticking to, and yeah. So it's very, very fascinating. Another very interesting aspect of the film is its use of foreshadowing, specifically with animals. Now, earlier I mentioned how the kids in the opening of the film were watching a whole bunch of ants consume scorpion. Eat and kill these scorpions. Now, just after the film's opening shootout, as the Wild Bunch are riding out of town, they see those same kids, and by this time, the ants have essentially devoured, have essentially overcome the scorpion and have devoured it. Foreshadowing of how the outlaw is essentially being killed off or dying off, and that modern society, or the ant, is prevailing. Another use of foreshadowing with animals is actually right before the film's climax. At the end of the film, one of the Wild Bunch is playing with a bird that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, is accidentally laid over or sat on. So the last image we have right before the Wild Bunch leave to make that fateful walk through the Mexican town to rescue the compatriot from the film's antagonist, General Mapache, is a film of that bird dying. And essentially, that is the fate that the Wild Bunch is walking towards, and they all know it. They know that they're not walking out of there. So it's really interesting how Peckinpah used animals in two very crucial scenes to depict their fate, fate of the characters themselves. A very another interesting aspect is the film's opening credits. Now, it uses something called chiaroscuro, which was a term that was originated in the film noir era. Um, that that was caused by its use of lighting, creating black and white patterns across sets. That was called chiaroscuro lighting. Now, there's something very similar that happens in the credits that uses freeze frames on key moments during the film's opening, because the film's opening credits is as the Wild Bunch is riding into that first town to rob the railroad payroll office, and it freeze frame. Sometimes it freeze frames on certain characters, most notably Pike, played by William Holden, and his compatriot Dutch, played by Ernest Borgnine, and it very much instills their their fate. Its use of black and white, because that's the interesting thing, is that it's not color. These freeze frames are in color. It freeze frames in black and white. And so it very much gives you the idea that these characters they're not gonna make it through, and instills a sense of foreboding or dread, almost like their tombstone. That what we're seeing is an image you'd see on a tombstone, something very black and white, and so it's very interesting use of that type of lighting during credits of a freeze frame. Very, very fascinating. A few other interesting just tidbits I throw in there for my critical analysis of The Wild Bunch. The film apparently shot approximately 9,000 rounds of fake ammunition, or blank rounds. Now, apparently, this was more than all the bullets that were fired during the Mexican Revolution of 1914, which is actually what the film is participating in, or the early days of the Mexican Revolution. So I thought that was really interesting. And approximately 10,000 squibs went off. And again, remember, squibs are those little, basically blood packs that explode on a character when they are shot. So I just thought that was a little interesting bit of a tidbit, interesting tidbit that I would throw out for you, out for you folks. So that does it for my critical analysis of the film. Again, I believe the film's strengths in terms of its technical aspects are its camera movements, its editing, and its use of sound, its lack of music, its use of sound in terms of gunshots and bullets and guns, and or as I like to call it, the bullet symphony, and its very, very controversial yet poignant and prominent themes of violence towards women, violence around children, its anti-Vietnam War message, and the idea of age and a dying way of life. Its use of animals and foreshadowing, very interesting, and its credits are just so unbelievably powerful. It doesn't really hit you that first time you watch it. You have to watch it again and to have known what's going to happen to realize, oh wow, that's what those credits were at. It's just their fate frozen in time. It's very black and white for them, and it's just very, and again, grim in a way. But yeah, so that does it for my critical analysis of the film in terms of its technical aspects, or at least the aspects I believe that really make the film stand out. Now on to the audience score, if we were doing Rotten Tomatoes, or my enjoyment of it, the parts of the film that I really, really enjoy. So think of my critical analysis as the film studies person in me, or the critic in me, just kind of analyzing the technical aspects of the film, what really works in terms of the medium or magic of movie making, and now kind of on to my audience score, because I always thought the audience score was people who rate a film because they enjoy it, and what they enjoy about it, or what they didn't enjoy about it. So now on to my enjoyment analysis, for lack of a better word, for Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. First off, the narrative. The narrative is very, very interesting to me. Again, a group of aged outlaws in a dying way of life, and it's not going to end well. You feel very much like you're watching the end of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You just know it's not going to end well for these guys, and you're just basically watching them run out the clock until that last bullet, catches them, and their outlaw ways are done for good. But again, very interesting narrative, deals with a lot of interesting ideas, the ideas of loyalty, of sticking by your fellow man, no matter what. But yeah, so again, narrative, bunch of outlaws making their way through the old waking their way through the deep south, trying to get that one last score so they can ride off the proverbial sunset. All the while realizing that that there's something more important than money to them, and that's loyalty, which is what compels them at the end of the film to make that fateful walk through that Mexican town to confront General Mapache, who has one of their youngest compatriot, Angel, held captive, because they find that when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, loyalty is really is all we really have, and is all they really had. It was it was the most valuable thing to them, more valuable than any of the money that they were going after through the course of the film. So very, very poignant, but yet very simple narrative idea. Other things I liked about the film, in terms of my enjoyment of it, were the characters. Now, each of the outlaws of the Wild Bunch is a very unique character. Pike Bishop, played by William Holden, the leader of the bunch, very hard, very driven. Yet in a way is very charismatic. He sticks to his guns, sticks to his ideals, and yet he's haunted by a demon who's quite literally fallen in the form of Deke Thornton, played by Robert Ryan, who is an old compatriot of his who Pike had actually left behind, and who had left behind to be arrested. Mr. Thornton spent years in Yuma prison and was eventually released by Mr. Harrigan of the railroad in order to track down his old compatriot in exchange for his freedom. But again, so it's a very interesting idea in terms of the character dynamic between all these characters. They are an outlaw. They are very wild. They are an outlaw gang. They are a wild bunch. But you get the impression that despite all the bickering that goes on, that these men are very unique, but they're certainly not your stalwart. They're certainly not your stalwart Western heroes, because they're not heroes by any means. They are the film's protagonists. They're anti-heroes, and that's like the best thing you can call them, because they're certainly not heroes. Nor are the antagonists who are pursuing them, led by Deke Thornton. They're certainly not heroes either. These are just men who are just trying to survive. And each of the characters has flaws, and they make mistakes, and they're all very human. Each of us is confronted with our own demons, and each of these characters confronts their demons throughout the film, and it's really quite something. The shootouts are quite easily probably the biggest enjoyment factor for me personally, because I'm a bit of an action nut. The shootouts in the film are very, very, are very reminiscent of something you'd see in a John Woo action film, or in a Wachowski brothers action film, or a Tarantino action film. The shootouts in this film kind of just really set the bar for all shootouts that would follow in action films to follow. So the dialogue is certainly not true. It's very modern. There are a lot of jabs at each other. There's no stiff or stalwart John Wayne type machismo or kinds of dialogue. It's all very gritty. It's all very real, and it's also funny. There's a lot of dialogue in this film. It's funny. In fact, if you watch the film, you would think that some of the dialogue that you hear in the film is almost something you would hear in a Tarantino movie. Very witty, very quippy, it's really quite fascinating. So those aspects, the narrative, the interesting, the simple, classic Western narrative that has a little bit something more to it. The story of loyalty, a story of men who want to be loyal, who find themselves more compelled or driven by the need to survive and their greed, really. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they realize that loyalty is really the only currency that is worth anything in this world, in their world. But yeah, so that kind of the narrative of the film, very interesting. Character development was great. Pike is a charismatic, great leader. Dutch played by Ernest Borgnine, is a fantastic he's kind of Pike's right hand man, best friend. Really just sticks by him. kind of thing. And each of the characters in the film are, again, by no means your stock Western character. Each is very unique. They're very modern. They're very flawed. You can see a little bit of yourself, perhaps, in each of the characters, in terms of what they face, how they feel. It's just, again, very, very interesting. The shootouts in the movie, again, up until now, no one had seen anything like it, at that point in film history, in 1969, no one had seen the shootouts like the as seen in The Wild Bunch. And the dialogue, again, very witty, very interesting, and just very, very on point, very modern. Again, it doesn't feel stuffy. It feels very real. You would feel that that's something you would say if you were in their shoes. But at the same time, it also is. It can also be a little bit go a little bit above and beyond in terms. But yeah, it's difficult to really describe the dialogue of the film. It's just you really just have to watch it for yourself. But again, this film, while very controversial, is very beautiful. It's very beautiful in terms of its scope and what it has to say. Really, it's really quite something. I like to think of it as, or it has been called in some circles, savage poetry. And again, just what it represents as the death of the classic Western and kind of the birth of the revisionist Western. Of the Westerns would follow, like McCabe and Miss Miller, and Unforgiven, and Pale Rider, Tombstone, Wyatt Earp. These are all Westerns that came out after, and they all kind of fall into that revisionist Western that don't follow that classic Western archetype like many of John Wayne's Westerns did. The Wild Bunch is not your grandpa's Western. Certainly not, or your great grandpa's Western, depending on the age of the person watching this particular show. But yeah, but again, I must stress that this is not a family-friendly film by any means. It's not. It's very violent. It's very brutal. Again, its depiction of women is not great. It has foul language. It has nudity, which, as I say, these things are pretty enticing for most moviegoers. But again, just as a reminder, guys, this is not your grandpa or great grandpa's Western. This is dark, modern, gritty, and it really just represents everything that the Western was and everything it really can be, and it appeals in many ways to the modern audience, which is why I think it really just stands out, because it has really withstood this test of time. It doesn't feel old. It doesn't. It feels very modern. It just feels like it's like a snapshot, and it feels a snapshot of history that just really flows through, and it doesn't feel like it's tied to any particular filmmaking time, and it's really, really quite something. Well, that does it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed. As my show continues, it will improve in terms of its quality. Right now, I'm just simply recording on my laptop camera. As soon as I can, as soon as I'm able, in terms of money, I will be purchasing upgraded equipment and really, really make a show of this. But just want to give this a shot. For my first episode, just make it very, down to earth and very gritty, I guess, much like The Wild Bunch. Well, again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Tyler's Tributes. Take care, guys. And remember, enjoy the movies. Have a great time at the movies.